This week on the podcast, I'm joined by Rob from Adeptus Psychonautica. Rob runs a YouTube channel focused on psychedelics, plant medicines, as well as exploring topics such as consciousness and the nature of reality. He has attended a number of ayahuasca retreats across the globe, taken part in numerous DMT ceremonies, and is a veritable knowledge base on all things mind-altering. His skeptical approach to these subjects is something I strongly respect, and one of the reasons I was so interested in having him on the show. If you're interested in the world of psychedelics and haven't had the chance to check out his material, you can do so on his YouTube channel, Adeptus Psychonautica, which I highly recommend, and you'll find a link to all of Rob's content in the description below. I have been looking forward to this conversation all week, so without further delay, Rob, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks a lot for having me on, Dan. It's always a pleasure to talk to a fellow psychonaut, mate. So, thanks a lot for inviting me.
Oh, you're very welcome. So, to start with, I actually wanted to talk about the first time you took a psychedelic substance. What can you remember of that experience and what you took away from it?
What I remember from it was I was the very first time I took a psychedelic. I was, I think, 14 years old, and I took LSD because I come from a kind of city of Manchester, and it was just floating around a lot of that time. This was kind of coming into around the 90s, the sort of where rave culture was really taking off. And it was just everywhere. And I remember not to incriminate him too much, but my older brother passed me some and said, try some of this. You'll have a good time with it. And so, me and my friend, at age 14, possibly even slightly younger than that, took a hit of acid. And at first we had a really good time with it. And then it took a bit of a dark turn and it went completely wrong. And it's a bit of a convoluted story. Maybe we could get into that later on, but we ended up absolutely paranoid out of our minds that our parents knew what we were up to and just spent hours walking the streets, just absolutely crapping our pants. And it's very, I've no idea how from that experience I ended up doing it again, because it was a nightmare. It was an absolute, just the worst possible introduction to psychedelics ever. And this was a fairly recreational dose. This wasn't having anything particularly visionary going on, and we were just laughing so hard. We had that really gig. Everything was funny, and then it just kind of wasn't. But yeah, from that, I think it was just because the opening part was so much fun. It left the door open for me to try it again. But certainly for the first. Yeah, all the first times I was doing psychedelics, mostly LSD, it was purely recreational, and I had no idea that there was this extra layer to it. I mean, you don't when you're a kid, you don't really have those kind of tools in the toolbox to even recognize the extra layers to it. And I think it's probably as I got into my 20s and I started experimenting with the food things. That's where I started recognizing there was actually something here worth exploring beyond just like something that was very funny.
Yeah, I mean, is that kind of what led you to start creating the type of content that you do on YouTube? Then obviously, it's had a significant impact on how you see life, your outlook on life. So is that the driving force to push you towards creating this kind of content on YouTube, or was there something more you wanted to get out of it?
The YouTube content is really a byproduct of everything else. So the YouTube project, as it was, just came from, I was doing I was already doing these kind of retreats and things like that. And I was doing what everybody else does. I was taking pictures, I was taking videos on my phone. And so I was just amassing an amount of content. And after a couple of years, I'd gotten a lot of it, and I didn't really have anything to do with it other than just maybe delete it off my phone. It was just taking up room. And then I was on one retreat. This is one-on-ones in Peru. And as we were leaving, they sat us all down to give us a talk about, this is just the beginning of the work. Don't just sort of leave here and go back to exactly how things were. And so they kind of gave us a list of recommendations of things to do and, ways to kind of channel our energy into something that's sort of productive. And one of them was have a creative outlet. And at that point, I realized I don't really have a productive hobby. I would say I was playing a lot of video games. I was doing a lot of sort of just sitting in front of the couch and easily spending 8 hours like just doing that or watching movies. But I wasn't doing anything creative. And so the idea kind of came to me initially just to start using this footage, or put it together, make some montage videos, maybe do some reviews of the places I've been. And if you look at my early content, that's really what it was. It was kind of me critically reviewing the places I've been to, saying, you know, this place is good, this place is worth the money, this place is not worth the money. I thought these guys were a little bit culty, you know. It was that was the direction I thought I was going in, and I thought that kind of was a good mesh of my kind of skeptical, objective nature, and you know, these places I was going to. I didn't really, at that point, I didn't want to get too much into these ideas of talking about sort of spirituality, or talking about even doing things like trip reports necessarily, because I thought that was already being covered, but I didn't see a someone who was filling that niche of just providing the basic information, like is this a good place to go to, you know, like. And I think one of the things there is that people struggle with separating out the experience that they're having because of the medicine with the actual place themselves. And so people will often say this was the best thing ever, even though the place they've been to might have been an absolute shithole and it might have been just not worth it. So that was where I was trying to fill in. And over time, it just kind of evolved into kind of the things I'm at today, where I'd started wanting to share opinions on other things. I was having conversations with people and recognizing that they were having some kind of, you know, logical or like cognitive blocks, or were kind of believing certain bits of woo-woo without really questioning it. And so that's why my channel shifted in direction a little bit.
Oh, I mean, that I can relate to what you're saying, especially that I know for the first time when I took a psychedelic substance, I think I was 16, and I thought what I was taking was acid, but it turned out to be is it Dom, X-Dom,
Yeah,
Dom
yeah,
X. So it's like an analogous substance
yeah,
of acid, and it was a very strange experience. But it was from originally reading trip reports before I'd had any experience with psychedelics, that reading these people's experiences was like reading almost like fiction. It was people glimpsing into other worlds and realities. It was just so alien
yeah.
compared to what you experience in kind of a sober state of mind in your day-to-day basis. So that was kind of the carrot on the stick for me. And yeah, I can bad trip experiences is something we can talk about if that's where the conversation takes us.
Sure.
Because you mentioned, and it was interesting to me, that there has been this rise in interest in both the kind of spiritual world and also the psychedelic world. It seems to be taking off, especially in younger generations. I think that's helped in part due to people like Joe Rogan and yourself and other content creators that put content out that incorporate this world. But have you had any thoughts, or do you have any ideas, or what are your beliefs on why psychedelics and spirituality is kind of coming more into the mainstream?
Yeah, sure. I think it's, I think that the two things are, and trying to give by the two things, I mean well, I suppose three things: psychedelics, spirituality, but also like you just mentioned, technology. And I think the promise of all these things is connection. I think that's what we're looking for. We are, you know, I remember being a kid, and we like first get on the internet, and when you have that moment of realization that, wow, I can like talk to people over here, and we can form a group, we can become like a team. You know, like I mentioned, I was into video games. We can make our own community here. We could set up a forum, and we can exchange ideas, and we don't have to be necessarily there at the same time. So that was like the initial promise of you know, like the internet. And certainly I think this is why platforms like Facebook and stuff have risen high, you know, because that's the same thing. It's like, oh wow, I can reconnect with my family and the people I've not seen since school. And likewise, that's what's kind of been offered. Certainly, I mean, it's one of the things that gets offered through these retreats, or this idea of a psychedelic culture. It's like, here's people like me, and I can connect with them. And not only can I connect with them like via sort of technology, but we can get together and we can share an experience. We can share something amazing, something transcendent. And then because of that experience, we can then, develop these kind of like, these spiritual paths, and we can go down a journey together. So I think these things are all aiming at the same point, the same kind of need within us to feel connected to other human beings, to feel like we are part of something. And I think that is the thing that has been lacking, maybe, and it probably is still lacking to a degree, but I think that's the promise that people are latching onto, and I think it's a real promise. I think that's there, and I think the question for us now, as a kind of like psychedelic community or psychedelic culture, is like, well, first of all, are we actually a community? Like, are we going to just use this word, but really we just sort of connect in the most arbitrary way, or can we use it to sort of cement the missing block that was kind of there in society? Like if you went back to say like the 1980s or something, where everything was hyper material and things felt very empty and vapid, and I think this is what the culture is like pushing back against now. No, we want to be connected, we want to be close to each other, we want to have something in common, we want to feel these these tribes. Then I think that's what we can get at if we put the effort in. But of course, we have seen this before in the 1960s, where there was this huge surge of what felt like a powerful new cultural experience, which then the wave just kind of broke and it kind of slid away again. And I think that there's a chance of that happening again. And I think that the difference between the 60s and now is the technology aspect. The technology aspect cements it very firmly in the mainstream. But I think we just need to sort of keep the experience grounded, keep it sort of realistic. Because I think this is where the 60s got it wrong a bit. It was kind of like just purely relying on say like the drug aspect to carry that revolution through to its kind of fruition. And this is something I speak against a lot on my channel. As I say, no, it's the substance itself is not going to get you the distance. You're going to have to sort of put the work in. You're going to have to get there yourself. And so I think if we can reinforce that through this technology, and also along the way dispel the kind of the bullshit that's popping up, then maybe there's a chance there of us being able to turn this into something useful. But we'll have to see how that one plays out. I actually think this is like a pretty incredible time to be alive at once. I think it's exciting, but I think there is a good chance of it just disappearing into nothing useful for maybe another 50 years.
Yeah. Oh, I'm in agreement with you that it's an exciting time to be alive, and I think that point you made is super cogent, in that there's always the danger of psychedelics, for example, becoming more commercialized, more like as more of a fashion statement. I mean, we've seen it with marijuana as the legalizations kind of crept across, especially in the States. I feel there's a wee bit of respect then lost for the experience, and it's more around, different strains, which ones contain the most THC, etc. And it kind of pulls you away from what, as you say, the psychedelic experience should be about, which is finding that kind of shared aspect of humanity and using it as a tool to connect to one another, rather than who can trip as hard as the next person. Because you read these reports, especially of younger generations, especially of kids that maybe or have just gotten into their kind of psychedelic experiences, and the substance mixing that they're doing and the dosages that they're using, it can't be healthy for any developing mind. It's probably not healthy for any developed mind. And I think there's a real danger there of us losing the kind of connection side of things and looking at it more as just the experiential side.
Yeah, I mean, there is, mate. And I think even more so is that what I've certainly seen is that a lot of the people who are doing that, what you just described, when you can get lost in this kind of experience, and it is a kind of a weird thing about psychedelics, because they're not addictive in that way of that, that you crave more, but you can get lost in the kind of the idea that you are sort of unlocking more by pushing yourself further. There is a challenge to them, I'll put it that way. And I've spoken out about a few guys who do this on my channel, where it's like, you will be more spiritual if you do, X and Y, and sort of if I stay up for 72 hours straight and sort of just keep drinking ayahuasca to us, then even though you see these guys are just like a complete mess, and they'll be talking complete babble, but they'll be convinced in their head that they're actually transcending, into something amazing, and that this is the best time they've ever had it. And it's damaging to the kind of, for want of a better term, the brand of psychedelics. Clearly, I think it's damaging to themselves. So I think there is. This is one why I always try and recommend towards like staying grounded and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's super important, and it's a message that should be preached, I think, in the kind of wider community, and see it more as a learning tool rather than just for the experiential side of things. And that kind of actually brings me to something else that I was interested in talking to you about, because you've done a few videos on how you stay grounded, especially, I mean, because it's no secret you've had your fair share of psychedelic experiences, and I was wondering if you could give maybe a little bit more of your thoughts and a wee bit more insight into the processes that you use to stay grounded, and what the importance is of having a good headspace before you take on these experiences.
Yeah, well, I think the first one is exactly what you just said. You have a good headspace before you take it. Like, no, you've got to, I think, be on some kind of like baseline. Again, this isn't always totally possible. A lot of people take these things because they are incredibly damaged, and that's, in some cases, it's the last resort. So, granted, this is not always the case, and I've certainly been on retreats with like guys who've had like PTSD or very deep trauma. But I'd say even those guys were still pretty grounded. They knew what they were getting into. They weren't, absolutely sort of hysterical or really unstable. They were just aware they were very damaged. So I think come into it knowing what you're getting yourself into. And one of the things I tend to do is make some notes before I go into an experience of just basically where I'm at before I go, so that something I can refer back to then. So like I expect, this is my intention for this experience. I intend to perhaps push myself into an uncomfortable place. I expect that it's probably going to make me deeply upset. It's probably going to make me sort of cry. I'm probably going to feel like I'm, depending on what I'm doing, if it's like an ayahuasca retreat, I might write down like, I expect at some point I feel like I'm going to be losing my mind, but this is normal. This is the process that I'm signing up for. I know what I'm signing up for. I know I'm signing up for an incredibly challenging experience. So that's one part of it, is just to be aware of what you're getting into. And, this with all the other stuff of depending on where you're going. So if you're going to somewhere like the jungle, be aware of how incredibly uncomfortable you're going to be in this just, absolutely crazily humid environment with bugs biting chunks out of you every 2 seconds. You are so far out of your comfort zone that, again, just prepare yourself. This is what I signed up for. And then I think the main thing is just to keep in mind like this. So like once you've sort of gone through the experience, and the experience can, will play out however it's going to play out. But just keep in mind, it doesn't end when you sober up. That's not the end of it. That's the start of it, if anything. So just keep in mind that all those feelings are going to, ramp up, come out of nowhere. You're going to be feeling sort of extremely sort of like destabilized. It could even come back, weeks, months later, where you think you were fine, and then suddenly just all this emotional turbulence just appears. Be aware that your thoughts might become very, very strange. And this is one thing I always kind of arrange with people before I go. Like, guys, I'm going to go and do this thing. Just don't. If I come back and start talking complete nonsense, don't freak out. It's part of the course. And in doing that, I make myself aware of it. And I think this is one of the things where I see people get very sort of destabilized. It's almost like they forget that they are putting themselves through this experience. So, and then they have an experience of, for instance, like godlike superpowers or something like that, and just start taking it completely literally at face value. not giving themselves a buffer to sort this out. And I've seen people make life decisions in this kind of state. I've seen people leave their partners. I've seen people sort of quit their jobs, and so I would always say, like, do not make any big decisions probably within like the 3 months at least after a deep psychedelic experience, because chances are you're not going to feel like that slightly afterwards. But then there's just the very basics are make time for yourself. When you make time for you to be still, to process what you've been through. Because if you think you can go through one of these really deep experiences and then just slide back into your 9-to-5 job and like la 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 la, and I had the experience that was on Saturday, but today is Tuesday, so it's business as normal, and I'll be in the pub on Friday. It's like, no, forget it. You make time to really process this experience, just to sit there and be still with yourself and think, okay, well, what happened? What were the key takeaways here? What am I going to do with this? Like, okay, so this made me feel like that. Okay, what am I actually going to do with that? And, meditations are the kind of very obvious one here. Everybody who says you should meditate, they're right. Yeah, you should. And then there's various little, aids to meditation that I brought back from my travels. One is doing things like rapé, which is a kind of Amazonian snuff. I use that as a way of kicking off my meditation practice, or smoking mapacho cigars, which is kind of cigars that come from Peru, or whatever, do yoga, whatever your thing is. But yeah, it's just around that sort of being aware of what you're getting into, and then sort of having awareness of what you're going through, and then making time to integrate it.
Yeah, I think that's very important. I mean, to push a wee bit further into this, I know from my own personal experience, I must have started smoking marijuana when I was maybe not super young, maybe about 18 or 19. Smoked it for 3 or 4 years, pretty much daily, which I don't recommend for anybody, because if you have a crux on anything and you're feeling you have to do it daily, that's an unhealthy habit you probably want to take a look at. But I never had any problems with it. And then I had a DMT experience, which kind of shook my foundations quite a lot. And
it does do that.
Yeah. Especially your first one. I think it's hard to know what to expect. And from that moment on, I can't smoke marijuana anymore, because it throws me right back into that mindset that I think even today I still haven't managed to conceptualize and house in a framework that sits well with my sober mind. So it will just throw me off, and it's a horrendous experience now, just to take one hit of a joint is too much. And in terms of what I was saying, how I wouldn't mind taking this a wee bit deeper, I mean, what is your opinion on the nature of self? I mean, and do you rationalize that kind of idea of a self, and how do you rationalize it when it's so altered during some of these experiences?
Yeah, I flip-flop quite a lot on these things, and this is one of the reasons I initially didn't go down this kind of road, because my honest answer is I don't know, but I do have an opinion, which I'm happy to share. My feel is, which is completely contrary to how my head thinks. So yeah, this might sound a little bit garbled, but I feel like we are kind of spectating here. We are sort of, talking around there being no self and that there's being no free will. I cannot help but agree with the logic of that. Why am I doing the things I am doing? Like even the words that are falling out of my mouth, why am I saying them? I don't know. And if I stop and think about it, I can't logically explain them. And if I think, if we took it to this place of logic, then, really we are a pattern of energy that was, really you could trace back to a sort of, an explosion from the first point of the universe outwards. And here I am, and I'm just kind of really just spectating this experience. Now, of course, that's not what I feel like. I feel like I'm completely in control. I feel like I'm, hello, look at me. I'm doing the thing with my hands. This is me. But then if I stop and think about it, like, well, why did I choose to do that with my hands and not with my feet? And so I get myself tied up in kind of knots like this. And I've got a friend, a guy called Dr. James Cook, who's a neuroscientist, and he does some studies on consciousness. And his theory around consciousness is what he refers to as the living mirrors theory. And I feel quite aligned with that theory, which is that, I'll kind of paraphrase it, but it's basically that we are both. We are, to use the analogy, if we are the juggler and we are the balls being juggled. So there is a motion that is going on, which we cannot, we are kind of powerless to do anything about. It's the balls are being juggled, and that is that. But we are also, we have the feeling of like the one who is in control of it. And yeah, I think that's certainly how when I'm in these deep psychedelic states, that's where I kind of more closely align. I mean, you do get these feelings of a complete dissolution of ego, a dissolution of boundaries, just complete, but still, even though that sounds like it's something that's kind of stripping you away, you find a feeling of a place within the universe. It feels like you are a part of this meaning. You have a purpose in being here, and you also realize just the vastness of what is on offer there. What the universe is, and how impossibly incomprehensible it is, but you are a part of it. And yeah, I think it's something that is not necessarily supposed to be understood or comprehended. I think it's something to be experienced. And this is something this is how I prefer to approach psychedelics, is as an experience. It's something, it's my experience. It means something to me. It's not necessarily supposed to come up with some kind of equation of A equals B, divided by Y. It's just pure meaning. It's up to me, just as with anything else within my human experiences, with like the birth of my children or getting married, or any of these experiences which meant something to me. They're impossible to quantify. I mean, I could tell you, how much I love my wife, and you get it, but it doesn't tell you. It tells you, you've got a rough idea of it, but it doesn't give you all the intricate details. Just like no trip report really gives you the intricate details of that trip. It could give you something, but as we know, it doesn't compile down into English at all. And so that's where I try and get to. All these things are stories, are meanings, are narratives for me to do something with. And if I don't do something with it, then it's a wasted opportunity. That's just then gone off into the ether. And if you think you can sort of dissect it into its components and like blah 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 blah, it is this, then I think that's also wrong. I think it's just the most personal experience I think it's possible to have.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds almost as if you kind of equate these experiences to almost like a divine experience. And I know I did see on one of your videos that you said before all of this that you would view yourself as an atheist. And I'm wondering, how do you see any parallels between the religious world and the psychedelic world? Because there's obviously a lot of crossover in terms of especially the spiritual side of it.
Yeah.
Is that something that you think about a lot, or do you think it's just a lucky kind of coincidence that they coincide in the way that they do?
No, I think there's a lot of crossovers there, and I would not be surprised to, if we had a time machine, to discover that religion or certain civilizations are completely inspired by psychedelics. I was actually having a conversation with a guy last night, and we were talking about ancient civilizations and just the amount of inspiration that it takes to start doing something like Stonehenge, or and again, Stonehenge is fairly small compared to something, say, like the pyramids of Giza. What can you implant in the human mind that gives you the motivation to do that when you could be out. You could be out pillaging and conquering lands. You could be out, mining gold. All these things which are supposedly important to people. You could be out sort of, grabbing women, raiding other villages, grabbing women. All these things that you think ancient cultures were doing, but no, they were raising monuments to what they perceived as divine beings. And well, how do you get everybody on board with that? Well, first of all, how do you get even the leaders on board with it? Because we're not, although they do their fair share of it, they're not necessarily orally all building statues to themselves. They're building things to the divine. Things like the pyramids are, allegedly sort of, places for a dead body to kind of begin its soul journey. So you've got to believe that really strongly. And I think the probably the most logical way to explain that is via psychedelics, that there has been some kind of psychedelic experience which has given you an experience of the divine, and then that's why a culture aims in that direction. And it's kind of surprising that, well, or not surprising even, that when you have some of these deep psychedelic experiences, like with DMT or something like that, this kind of like ancient architecture, things like pyramids and Aztec sort of step pyramids, and so it just comes flooding out of these experiences from nowhere. And so it seems to me that these cultures have interfaced with these psychedelic experiences, and are then trying to recreate what they saw. So I think there's a very strong connection there between religion and ancient civilizations and psychedelics, and I think that's something that's just been lost over time. The atheist part of what I talk about, it's just that it's easier. I don't think I wouldn't. I'm certainly not the classical atheist, although I would definitely was at one point. It's the reason I would identify as an atheist is just that I don't believe in the kind of earthly religious texts. And since that's what most people are talking about, it's like, what do you believe in? They're really asking you, are you a Jew? Are you a Christian? Or are you a Muslim? And I'm not. So it's just easy to say I'm an atheist. What am I? No idea. I think I've come around to the idea that there is something more than this. I don't know what this is. I don't claim to have any authority over that. I think I've had experience of it, but not to the point where it's going to, it's making me having a direct influence over the choices I make in the kind of the waking world. So I would just say it's easy to describe myself as an atheist because I reject the earthly kind of texts, although not necessarily rejecting the ideas or the humanity or the spiritual journey behind them. I can look at something like the Bible and completely respect that this is, our ancestors trying to understand what must have been a completely different world, where people can just drop dead, you're healthy one day, you just drop dead, 2 days later because you got sick. And, if it doesn't rain enough, then you're screwed. And, you're living in some of these very inhospitable places. So, I can totally, I have a lot of respect for the religious texts. Again, I don't necessarily believe them, but I've also got a lot of dislike for the organizations that have sprung up around them, which I think, and so, in that regard, I'm an atheist because I would not want anything to do with something like the Catholic Church or, just any of these mainstream religions.
Yeah, I mean, you touched on something there that I found quite interesting, which was the idea of kind of ancient ideas and symbology that emerge with these experiences. Like as an example, in your YouTube art, you incorporate symbology. You have what looks to me to appears to be the Eye of Providence, which is suggested you can trace back to the Eye of Horus from ancient Egyptian. Nike, for example, have the swoosh as their logo, but the name Nike is also references the Greek goddess of victory. Starbucks have the what is it, the twin-tailed siren from Greek mythology, and these are all kind of contemporary organizations and corporations that use this sort of symbology to advertise and promote the products today. And if you let me go on just a wee bit more,
go for it.
Just I had a DMT experience where I was confronted with this image of a snake wrapped around a pyramid. And before I'd had this experience, I didn't pay much attention to symbology. I started doing a wee bit of research on what maybe things it could relate to, or what it might mean. And I realized, or came to know, that the snake, for example, depicts like a fertility and rebirth, which seems to
Mhm.
be due to the way they shed their skin. You have the Ouroboros, which is the
Yeah.
image of a serpent consuming its own tail, which seems to kind of represent eternal life and this kind of feeding back into the system that it puts back out again eternally. The pyramids were originally a symbol of Ben, which in the creation myth was this primordial mound that arose out of the waters of Nu. And as I said, up until that point, I'd had no real affinity to symbolism, but it seems every other psychedelic experience I had after that fact brought back to life and showed the same sort of symbology and symbolism and imagery that's so prevalent in these ancient cultures that we look at it. I agree with you. It seems almost too coincidental for there to for them not to be related in some aspect.
Mhm. Yeah, I think a lot of this as well ties into things like Jungian psychology, where there are these archetypal figures, and you can relate to like. I mean, you see these in the movies that we watch. You know, I mean, if there's a lot of the Joseph Campbell stuff around the hero's journey is very sort of prevalent in all the kind of most popular movies like Star Wars, The Matrix, and stuff like this. And you recognize these archetypes. You recognize like the young hero, the one who sets out on a journey to gain new knowledge, and then once they've gained that knowledge, you know, they defeat, you know, the dragon, whatever the dragon is, whether it's Darth Vader or you know, the agents from the Matrix. And then once they've done that, they then return again with that knowledge to then take on a new role. And you know, there's so all these different sort of archetypes of, you know, like like I say, the young hero, the old king, you know, the fool, you know, death. And it seems like, I mean, again, these archetypes pop out within these psychedelic experiences, and these kind of ancient architecture also pops out. It, yeah, it's hard not to think that there's something hard coded into us as human beings, and I for whatever reason, I don't know. I don't know what the logical reason is, and you get into all sorts of theories of, you know, ancestral memories or memories being hard coded into genes or whatever. I don't know, but I just remember I was startled when it happened, because at that point I did not think I was predisposed or preloaded to seeing all this stuff. And then when I did DMT, it just came pouring out of the ceiling, or just pyramids and, you know, just all this, yeah, this Mayan, Aztec, Inca stuff was just literally just falling out of the living room, and I was just like, "What the fuck is going on?" And it was amazing, and that was one of the things that made me want to go to Peru. I thought I've got to see this now. So yeah, yeah, I mean, you could go down some right rabbit holes there, like why are we preloading things? But I think that is one of the reasons why people have these very common experiences on something like DMT. It's, you know, the classic, the sort of, you know, the entities and the sort of very crystalline cities and the, you know, the transforming geometry. It's a very, almost like a, you know, a standardized experience across different cultures. So there's something in there. We're wired in a certain way, I think.
I agree with you completely. You mentioned that you went off to Peru. You've also mentioned that you've had experiences with, in your videos at least, you've had 5-EMO DMT experiences. When you say DMT, most people would think of NM dimethyltryptamine, which is the most kind of common form
Yeah.
of DMT that you'd find. Being somebody that's not experienced 5-MeO DMT, I mean, what would you say are the main differences in the effects? Is there similarities between the experiences, or are they fundamentally a different beast, so to speak?
Fundamentally different. Yeah, it's you've really got to forget the DMT part of the 5-MeO DMT, and I think I think this is I was as guilty of this as anybody else. It's just because of the name, you kind of expect it to be DMT with a kind of, you know, with a twist, DMT with a slice of lemon. and it's just not. I would say DMT and NDMT, you feel extruded out into, you know, a million possible pathways. All these things kind of happen it's quite in a chaotic, kind of quite bizarre fashion. And then as you get into like a few minutes, they gradually kind of like coalesce back into one experience, and you end up with one kind of holistic experience. But before that, there's a real chaotic madness to it, which I think is amazing, but it can also be quite uncomfortable. It's just so bizarre. 5-MeO-DMT is the opposite. It instantly collapses down into this oneness, which then is just the predominant factor. There's very little going on visually. There's very little going on in terms of wackiness. I mean, there just isn't any kind of wackiness to it at all. It's just, it just is. It just becomes this experience of isness. So they are incomparable. I would say the experiences, and I think the fact they both got DMT in the title is probably led a few people astray. And you certainly see this on things like DMT forums where people are like, oh, I've done DMT 5-MeO next. It's like, yeah, dude, this is not like it's not like tasting beers, it's not like, oh, I'll take this one. It's more or less the same stuff. It would be like the equivalent of, having, an apple and then having, a meat pie. It's just, they're just not the same. It's so, yeah. But I mean, that said, I would certainly recommend them both as an experience. I think they're both, probably two of the most life-changing experiences I've ever had. I would say I would probably lean more towards an NDMT, just because I think it's just more fun. It's just incredibly amazing, and I like to feel that sense of sort of like childlike awe and wonder at just something that incredible and unfolding in front of you. Whereas I think 5-MeO-DMT is much more introspective, and it's a very funny one to read. In fact, I think when I did a video on 5-MeO-DMT, and I think I titled it like I'm completely lost for words, because it's just so hard to describe. You just kind of, and it's very white. It's very it takes you right out of your body, but it takes you somewhere in your body. Fuck knows. It's a really tough one to describe, mate.
I think that's a kind of common theme that runs through pretty much all psychedelic experiences. I mean, I wonder what your thoughts are in terms of with the legalization of marijuana. What your thoughts would be around the legalization of kind of more in psychedelics, primarily. How do you think that would go? If we're both from the UK, I think you said you live in Switzerland at the moment.
Yeah.
Is it Switzerland that is it them that have kind of what do you call it? Not legalized, but
not decriminalized. Sort of
decriminalized. Yeah.
They're more loose than the UK for sure. So things like 5-MeO-DMT, you can actually just mail order here. Certain things are still criminalized. So DMT. They're a little bit more flexible on marijuana than the UK, and they've got a little bit of sort of under the radar national pride around LSD, because that's, it was kind of invented here, but still, I don't think that's legal. I think probably where you're referring to is more Portugal, where it's pretty much anything goes there. My take on it is, so I'm in a bit of a funny position, because on the one, I mean, the first thing, I do not want anybody being made a criminal for having these substances. I think that's just completely wrong. That said, I don't think they should necessarily all be completely readily available. Like I'm a parent, I've got 2 kids, and I'm fine with them, doing the same things that I did when I was exploring these things. I think it's an inevitable part of growing up. But yeah, I don't think I necessarily want people just being able to pop into the streets and buy things like DMT. I think the nature of the legal situation with them does serve as a bit of a gatekeeping thing, whereby you can get them if you want to get them. There are ways of getting these things, but they're not readily available. And that's where I worry about the legalization thing, because I've certainly been in places like Holland where, magic mushrooms were at one point completely legal. Now they're not, but now they've just replaced it with truffles instead. And yeah, you just see people just completely just abusing magic mushrooms, just swallowing them by the bagful, and then just being a mess in the streets. And yeah, that's not what I want. But I think in order to get to that place whereby we don't have people doing that, we're going to have to build something as a society. We're going to have to build something whereby people can use them properly. This is then going to be the trick, because it's fine for someone like me who can, afford to go on sort of retreats and somewhere like South America, and I can do this in a safe space, which has been specifically created to facilitate these retreats. But obviously that doesn't happen, say, in the middle of Manchester. There isn't a space like that. So what do? Well, you do it in the streets with your friends, or you do it in a park with your friends. So I think there's got to be, if we are going to go down that legalization route, that cannot be the end of the conversation that, oh, well, good times, now things are legal. It's got to be, and here is the framework we are going to put in place in order for us to be able to work with these things properly. And then, of course, I think that, you get onto the conversation then about like more harder drugs, things like heroin and cocaine. And yeah, for sure, I would not want those things being, freely available, because I think they could be incredibly destructive. But again, I don't want anybody penalized for these things. I think people should have the sovereign right to choose what they want to do, for themselves. But yeah, I mean, it's one of these where it's a messy conversation, and it's probably for people smarter than I am. But I think we should move towards integrating them into us as a society. But it cannot just be, okay, well, there you go, it's legal. Go wild, guys.
Yeah, I think after the invention of LSD, the whole scientific community just kind of took a collective step back, because they didn't know what to do with this substance. They had no way of explaining it. And I think from there, I think nowadays, especially with, is it in Johns Hopkins University, the experiments are happening with DMT, etc. And you've got a push to use things like ketamine for depressive disorders. I think it's starting to move back in, but like you say, I think education is the big thing, because whilst you will always hear things from your friends, especially if you're growing up and you're younger, if you've got people that you respect and your peers that you're looking up to that can educate you on these substances, it's probably going to allow for more responsible use from the population at large, rather than just, as you say, releasing the floodgates and letting people have at it.
Yeah, I think it's more than just education as well. I think it's also infrastructure, and this is where places like South America have got one up on us, because if you go to somewhere like Peru, it's just baked into the culture. There are ayahuasca churches, there's ayahuasca temples all over the place. It would be completely normal to have a conversation with someone and they say, what did you do last night? And they say, yeah, I went and visited my sister. What did you do last night? Well, I had a transcendence experience with ayahuasca. Oh, cool. Let's say, what are you going to get for lunch? That's a normal conversation, because it's not a big deal. If I went and had that same conversation at my office, the room would just disperse instantly. They think I was a madman, So we've got to, first of all, we've got to get it into ourselves culturally. But then, yeah, I think we need to have places. We need more like centers where people can go and sort of drop in and sort of, like a church. I mean, this is kind of why I think, churches like Catholic churches or whatever are the dominant spiritual force in Europe, because they are a thing where you can just go and drop in. You can drop in and you could do a spiritual activity, be at church, and there is a community to it and you can take part in it. And I think we need that for psychedelics. I think we need that thing of where it's like, okay, it's a Friday, I'm going to go and be with this crowd. I'm going to drop into this kind of scenario. And so that's going to take some kind of infrastructure to build that.
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely lost a lot of the community side of what we talk about in today's society.
For sure. Yeah.
I wonder what you would say to the notion that the reason there's still such a stigma against psychedelic experiences, especially in the Western world, but I mean equally so in like all over the globe, is the kind of fact that they do change your perspective on how you see life. I know for myself and many people I know, things that you started to view, or things that you previously viewed as quite important, suddenly they kind of lose that pull. So whether that's possessions, whether that's having a new car, yet at the same time, if we were to challenge, or if these perspectives were to change, that's going to challenge large financial interests, and as such, there's almost an incentive from a currently established framework of society to protect itself against the influence of a change of perspective or a flip. Have you ever kind of thought about what the pushback force is against the psychedelic acceptance?
Yeah, again, I've got kind of mixed feelings on that one, because I think if there's one thing that's been taught to us by kind of history, it's that industry and sort of commerce and capitalism are very adaptable and are very good at getting your sort of money. And I think that's, and I've got absolutely nothing against industry or commerce or capitalism or all that. I think they've brought us all this kind of technology and stuff that we're used to, and I'm sort of grateful for that. I think we'll see a shift, and I think that shift is a good thing. So I mean the obvious things at the moment is I would say there's not, or there's a large majority of people within the psychedelic community who would, given the choice, would probably favor an electric vehicle or solar panels or stuff like that. So, and it's becoming an easy choice now because they're kind of cool. You want a nice Tesla, it's got gull-wing doors and stuff like that. I mean, I'd take one. So the commerce will fit to the new taste. It's like, hey, you guys, you want to be more environmentally sort of sound. You want to be more one with the planet. Well, here's your indoor herb making garden, and here's your bed that was made out of recycled materials, and blah blah blah. There is a way for that machine to keep on trucking. So I don't think I don't particularly buy into the narrative that there is a pushback against that. Like there's a kind of a shadow brokers of people trying to like, how can we shut these fucking psychedelics up so we can carry on selling our nitro belching Harleys or whatever. I think that bit will adapt. I think, yeah, I'm not too sure either about the kind of the political sort of angle, the idea of like the man trying to silence it. I mean that was certainly there. There's no doubt that was there in like the times of like Richard Nixon, like he was pushing back against people protesting, the Vietnam War and stuff. My impression is that people have gotten a very limited understanding of what is going on with these substances. Even the people who take them, I think, have got a limited understanding of what's going on. I certainly don't have that great an understanding. So yeah, who knows? I think governments are notoriously shit. I think it would be. I doubt they've got their heads together enough to do enough of a pushback. And I also think that just with the way that psychedelics are at the moment, it's almost impossible to, stuff everything back into Pandora's box. It's very easy to, do your own DMT extractions. It's very easy to grow your own mushrooms. Very easy to grow your own cactuses for things like, mescaline. And so, yeah, the kind of like the days of needing some kind of like shadowy infrastructure to get hold of these things is kind of gone. A lot of the kind of, the recipes for stuff's out there. So yeah, I think the world will adapt around it. And then I suppose the kind of the potential dark side there is that which I think I've certainly seen a lot of people have concerns with, is about capitalism overshadow or bringing these things in to the point where they make them ugly. So, the classic things are what's been in the news of opening sort of psychedelic centers where they're just trying to like patent all these different parts of the process, or lock it down so that, okay, well, we don't want people doing stuff at home, so we'll keep that part illegal for you to do at home, but it's legal to do it in our centers where you pay us. This is, that's the ugliness side of things. I think the way to do it would be to have both options open. I think if people want to do it at home, which they are doing anyway, that should be fine. And that if people want to go through a more guided experience and want to pay a premium for that, I think that's fine. That's exactly what I'm doing when I go on retreat. I go on retreat not because I want a cup of drugs, because I can make that same cup of drugs on my kitchen, but it's because I want that framework. I want that therapeutic framework where I'm going to disconnect from my life for 7 days or longer and have someone guide me through an experience. And so, yeah, I think that would be the kind of the utopia I think we should aim for, is having more of these kind of retreat settings available to more people, because that solves a lot of the problems that we talked about at the beginning. First of all, it gives you a safe place to do these things. It gives you a community where you can interact with other people. I don't particularly like the model of one person sat in a hospital room wearing a blindfold, listening to Enya or Whale Song, and with a doctor sat there monitoring them for 8 hours, and then asking them how they felt. I don't think that solves the connection problem. Whereas I think getting in a room with people and sort of feeling people going through a process with you and sort of forming some bonds with those people, I think that helps with the connection problem. It helps with your own sort of problems. So yeah, I think that would be the direction that I'd like to see things going.
Yeah, I mean, by the sounds of it, it seems as if for yourself and for others, you view these psychedelic experiences as definitely one of the kind of main benefits they bring is a therapeutic aspect. And I wonder what you think about the fact that people are obviously seeking these experiences, and the contrast of the psychedelic experience with the kind of sober experience of being, a human being in the 21st century. There's a definite disconnect between those experiences, and the fact that the psychedelic experience seems to have, for a lot of people anyway, seems to help with a lot of mental issues. You mentioned PTSD earlier. It helps with depression. Is there something happening in the 21st century in the world, the world we've designed for ourselves, that is fixed by psychedelics, that we can learn from the psychedelic world? There seems to be something wrong. There's an imbalance somewhere. Just wondering what you thought about that.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of things we kind of talked about. I think the first is that we have, if we cast our minds back to where we come from as a species, the kind of typical cliche, like the person in the cave, where your entire life would have been completely focused around your survival, around shelter, around where your food comes from, and we've kind of taken that to like the hyper extreme where every one of us pretty much lives in a fortress now. I mean, we literally, if we were in medieval ages, these would be castles that we live in. Our food is completely on tap. Each one of us will have cupboards stacked with food and fridges, ways of preserving food, which would have gotten people through like the harshest of winters, and we just put it in the fridge and freezer and then throw it away when it goes out of date. So we've got all this wiring to be in a certain way, and again, a lot of this then comes down to things like connection, whereby you make alliances with other people so that you can all get through these things together. But now we just wall ourselves into a little fortress, and we've got our stuff in and we can just turn on Netflix and forget all about it. And I think that's where this this clash is happening within us because it doesn't, something within us just tells us it doesn't make sense. And, you know, I think this is why people, when, you know, people want to go hiking and people want to go walking and camping and stuff like that. You want to go and swim in the lake, or, you know, the typical English thing, you want to go to the seaside and you want to pull your pants up and stick your feet in the ocean just so you feel connected to something. But that's not our life. And I think that's what we need to change somehow. And I think, and one way I think we can do that is, it is by having a, something where you're in reverence to something else, where you are in communion to a higher power. And again, this is where it gets tricky, because you kind of start going into what now is the language of mainstream religion. But the framework itself is absolutely fine, I think, of have something that you are aiming for. It's just that make sure that something that you are aiming for is something which betters you as a person, which betters your community or betters the world. Is not just token worship, which is where I think a lot of religion has gone wrong. And I think this is why when you talk to a lot of kind of old school religious people, they don't even seem to know what's actually in the texts. It doesn't actually mean anything. They're just parroting it back at you. And I think that's part of the beauty of psychedelics, is that you experience it. You have direct experience of the thing you are talking of, the transcendent. That's probably how you got in this place in the first. It happened to you. It landed on your face. You know, now you're like, and you're trying to get your head around it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Like you say, we are living in these castles, and we live in such a way at the moment that we are able to kind of shut out the outside world, so we can construct these artificial environments that are perfectly suited for our needs. Psychedelics comes along and it shows you reality, and to kind of use your metaphor, it will smash you in the face with it repeatedly. There's no option to look away from the very realness of your own existence. And I think
if I can just add one in there, Dan, I think there's just an extra bit. So within these castles, what I would say, for a lot of us who kind of grew up in the town that we did, not only are we sort of locked in our castles, but then our primary interaction probably outside of those castles is like something like you're on video games. You're shooting people in the head on Call of Duty, or you're telling people to fuck off on the internet, or you're going on Facebook and saying, what a ugly bitch somebody looks like, because, just everything is, a lot of the past interaction are just there to blacken your soul, for want of a better term. So it's no wonder, I think, that we're screaming out for these real connections. Like I want you to see me, I want you to see my avatar on Facebook, or I want you to see me. And it's kind of that just thought it came to us. It was this whole sort of analogy around castles, but we are the archers kind of leaning out of the halls, kind of taking pot shots at our neighbours, when really what we want to do is walking across to their castle and saying, "Hi, my name's Rob." Introduce ourselves.
Exactly. I mean, to kind of start wrapping things up, we've obviously spoken about psychedelics a lot. Is there one particular message or one particular insight that you've taken from all your psychedelic experiences, or maybe as a collective, that you feel is worth sharing?
There's a few, but to be honest, they're all very mundane, because I think that's my particular, for want of a better word, problem, is that I make things very complicated for myself, and this is what I like about psychedelics. Is it comes back to your sledgehammer analogy before, is that when I'm in these spaces and I think that the weight of the world is just bearing down on my shoulders and everything's just infinitely complex, and like, oh, my life's just so troublesome, and then it just like I'll just get that kind of message like, dude, it's okay. You're actually doing okay. Things are. It's actually really simple if you just let it. And I'll kind of sit there for a moment and think, shit, yeah, what a gift. I've just flown halfway around the world to take part in some cultural ceremony that's as ancient as time, and I'm feeling I feel all this connection that I've been talking about. I'm feeling it in this moment, and it's just so simple. And it's not a it's not a particular pearl of wisdom that you can share. There isn't an answer to this. It's just it's something to be experienced, and you've got to let yourself experience it. And I think that's the only sort of message I would sort of share that out there. Like, don't first of all, to kind of trust in yourself to have these experiences, and say yes to these experiences. When the universe sort of offers you the chance, I would say, for the most part, say yes. Seize the opportunity, and then just be content for it to be what it is. It's you don't. Again, you don't have to. You wouldn't expect to come down from the top of Mount Everest saying, yeah, that top of Mount Everest, that means this. It's no. You sit there, you look around, you take it in, and it means something, and it stays with you like forever. You did that thing. You challenged the mountain. You got to the top. You got, whatever it meant to you personally, and what it meant to you personally might mean absolutely nothing to anyone else. They might be like, Mount Everest, like, why? It's cold. I'm not going up there. It's stupid. It might fall off. So I think that's the only kind of insight or piece of wisdom I would dare to try and give anyone. It's your story. Go in there and have your experience and take it for what it is.
I think that's a great lesson. I think so many of us look to the outside world for validation on things we've done in life, or the way we see things, our beliefs, our political ideologies, and really it should be finding a contentedness within yourself, and being able to live with yourself, and not using the external world as a kind of measuring stick to which to view your own kind of self-worth.
Yeah, and I can see why people do that, because that is an easy pathway to this kind of community thing that we talked about. So if you and I share a mythology, if we import the same mythology, and we, let's go with like a cult example. There is a cult leader and he says this, and you and I both say, okay, this guy's the bomb. Let's do that. We're now brothers in that cult, and that's something, and you can probably get a lot of benefit just from the brotherhood aspect. But in terms of what's being pumped into your head, you're not actually having to think about that. And this is one of the things I try and do on my channel, is I want people to think for themselves. And I'm not necessarily saying that I'm right about any of this stuff, but I'm pretty sure that a lot of other people aren't right about this stuff. And there's a lot of the people who are importing this stuff and clearly not thinking about it for 1 second. There's no, I have people try and challenge me on stuff who clearly don't understand the point they're trying to challenge them. They just feel so passionately that they just, how dare you challenge my thing? It's when you see the kind of the most extreme sort of religious types on TV or whatever. It's like, I don't understand my thing, but fuck you, don't you say that about my thing. And yeah, I get stuff like that all day long. And I think it's just think about it. And if you think about these things and come to your own conclusions, then even better, let's have a conversation about that then, because then we can talk about things in we can challenge each other. And I would much rather have a conversation where ideas are being challenged and we're making me think about stuff, rather than a conversation where everyone's just agreeing with everything because some leader figure has said to do it. So I think, I think people should always, I mean, this is part of this whole integration topic. Think about the ideas that you're putting in your head. Don't just sort of, it's not true because somebody said it's true. You don't have to necessarily believe in the plant spirits just because you went on a retreat to Peru, but you can do, and that's fine. But make it your belief. Believe in it because of your own meaning, your own story. So yeah, I think that's something I feel very strongly about. I want people to have their own sovereignty, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson to take forward in life. In terms of the YouTube channel, have you got any plans for the future? Is there anything you're working on that you're excited about? Is there a direction you want to take things? Is there any kind of avenues of exploration that you haven't yet looked at that you're kind of wanting to get your claws into, so to speak?
Yeah, too many, to be honest. I'm one of these people. I've probably got about I've got 30 or 40 half finished ideas where I start with like, I've got to write this, I've got to prepare this, and then I'll get another idea and that one will take over. So there's a lot of unfinished ideas. Some of them are getting quite complicated in terms of the way I want to film them and stuff. I would say that's the part of the hobby that I enjoy the most, is doing stuff that's kind of I can't think of a better word than silly, but certainly being more creative. So, you know, some of the videos I made with this kind of stuff I've got going on in the background here, where it's storytelling basically. I'm telling my stories, and again, I'm not telling people what to believe. I'm just saying this is my interpretation of something that happened to me. I'd like to do a lot more of that, but they are quite labor intensive to do. But so yeah, that's one thing. I do also have a project I'm working on at the moment with a couple of other psychonauts, where we are looking to, basically, we've invented a device for smoking DMT, and that's something we're going to look at, sort of trying to get mass produced. And so that's a kind of very exciting project for me at the moment. We looked at all the devices that we'd used over the years, and sort of, okay, well, this is okay at this, and this is okay at this, but this part bugs me of this, and this bugs me of this. And so we just thought, well, why don't we try and make our own? And so we've been working with a designer and got some really interesting designs and prototypes built up. We've been doing lots of some 3D printing to build some workable prototypes. And yeah, I'd say hopefully we're coming to a point where I'm going to be able to announce that soon. We're hoping to do some crowdfunding to raise enough to be able to get an initial batch of these things manufactured. So that would be a whole new direction, something I did not anticipate at all.
I'm having flashbacks to when the making, what was it called? Was it the machine, which is you would break a glass bottle and hold a smashed glass bottle up to your face and stuff it with like wire or steel wool, and then use that. So I think alternative and safer ways to utilize DMT would be a good avenue to progress down.
Yeah, and also just one thing we realized as we're doing all this kind of tinkering with these, because you can utilize these vape devices these days, and you realize just how inefficient things like the machine and glass pipes are, because you find you can use a fraction of the amount of the substance and still get the same effects. So yeah, we just realized how much it was kind of like being burnt due to sort of overcooking it with the lighter or whatever. So yeah, that's something that we're looking at doing, and we don't know whether it's just going to be an initial kind of like boutique run or like a one-off run of making these things. We just want to make it for ourselves, but who knows if that could potentially turn into a separate kind of business angle. We don't know. So there's a whole lot going on there. But in terms of the channel, yeah, I just kind of I really want to. The part that interests me most is this kind of community part. I want to. I want to try and put my money where my mouth is and say, like, what is the community part of the psychedelic community? I'd like to, organize a few a few of my own like group trips out to various retreat centers, because one of the things I've come across when I've been talking to people is that they want to do these experiences, but they're kind of reluctant to do it solo, because they don't feel confident necessarily going out on their own and just, being in a sort of a strange country and going through a strange process. But whereas if there was a group of us that were going to meet somewhere and then we'd all go through it and we would like hire out this retreat as a collective, then they feel more comfortable with that. So that's something I'm looking into. So yeah, a few things on the plate. we'll have to see how many of them actually come to fruition, because I do this all as a hobby on my side. So everything I do with this channel happens in like, an hour or two in the evening, and a little bit of time at the weekends. And around that, I'm fitting my job, my 9-to-5 job, my family, my kids. So yeah, it's not enough hours in the day at the moment.
No, you'll certainly be kept busy. So I mean, just if people want to check out more of your stuff, obviously you have the YouTube channel, Adeptus Psychonautica. Where else can people find you, or is that the best place to go?
I mean, that's the best place for the main content. For the kind of the more chatty communication angle, I'd say my main platform at the moment is probably Discord. So again, it's just Adeptus Psychonautica, and there is a link to it within the YouTube channel. If you look in the banner at the top, there's links to Discord. Also, I've got a subreddit, but I would say Discord is where I'm leaning towards at the moment for my kind of like secondary thing. So if people want to come and chat with me, send me a message. Also, we've got a sort of community there of like people who will, offer advice around psychedelics or how to set up some of these electronic devices. You can sort of come there and talk to myself or some of the other kind of members. And then for those who want to support the channel, then we've got I have a Patreon, and then there's a few extra sort of features there for people who are patrons, where there's like sort of a Patreon only things and certain videos that only those guys get access to. But yeah, all the details, I would say, if you go to the YouTube channel and look there, then it's that's got all the kind of the links and stuff like that.
Cool. That sounds good. I'll make sure, as I said, to stick the links in the description of this. So if you're listening to this, if you go scroll to the bottom, you'll be able to find a link to all Rob's stuff there. Thank you very much. This was a fun conversation, and
It was, mate. Thank you.
yeah, and hopefully we can speak again soon. And yeah, apart from that, I'll let you get back to your evening, back to your family. And
sure, cheers, mate. Honestly, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. So yeah, if you want to have a chat again, just give me a shout, and yeah, let's catch up again sometime soon.